In 2004, or 2003, when I was living in Greece, I remember a Golden Dawn Krysiavgi march wound round my house. Slogans were painted on my front door and the windows, and I felt intimidated, as I indeed it was intended that I should. And so when I'm talking about the release of Michaloliakos's a release from prison, I'm doing so with a bias, and I hope that's clear. His home confinement tells us something about Greek democracy. And on the 12th of September, a judicial council in Lamia approved the conditional release of Nikos Michaloliakos, the 67-year-old founder of Golden Dawn and Krysiavgi, to serve the remainder of his 13-year sentence under home confinement on health grounds. The decision has reopened wounds that many Greeks hoped were finally cauterized by the 2020 convictions that exposed Golden Dawn as a criminal organization. The council authorized release to house arrest with restrictions on movement and monitoring, and this followed submissions citing ill health. It is effectively the second bite at clemency. In May 2024, he was briefly paroled. Then in early June 2024, an appellate body rescinded the decision, finding him unrepentant and likely to offend again. He returned to prison, and those reversals matter for judging today's risk. The latest order again cites medical grounds and replaces prison with home detention. Parties and victims' lawyers have condemned the move as privileged treatment. Krysiavgi, a Golden Dawn, was not a protest party that stumbled. It was judged a hierarchy directing violence. The 2020 verdicts covered the Pavlos Fissas murder, the attempted murders of Egyptian fishermen and communist trade unionists, and a pattern of racially targeted assaults. The legal label was simple and severe: leadership of a criminal organization. First, why the release bites so hard is, firstly, the timing and the symbolism. We are days from the annual 18th of September memorial for Fissas. To many Greeks, releasing the man who led the machine that killed him looks like institutional forgetfulness. Public statements from the left and from civil claimants say exactly that. Secondary consistency. In 2024, judges explicitly found that Michaloliakos' writings and media posts signaled no remorse and a continued identification with Nazi-style practice. Releasing the same defendant a year on creates a whiplash in public confidence unless the court publishes clear medical and legal reasoning that defends their action. Third, deterrence. The 2020 sentences were widely read as a line in the sand. If health-based leniency becomes a workable route for noxious leaders before mid-term, others on the radical right may bank on similar relief. That is exactly the anxiety voiced by lawyers from the Fissas family and the Egyptian fishermen. Greek criminal procedure allows conditional release on specific humanitarian criteria. It is not an acquittal. It transfers custody from cell to home and should come with enforceable constraint: electronic monitoring, bans on political communication that could incite, and rapid recall for any breach. Reporting so far confirms release under restrictions, but the precise modalities will matter. Parliament and prosecutors will be judged on how swiftly they act on any violation. Syriza's line is blunt: the decision injures the standing of the justice system. Expect parliamentary questioning, pressing the justice minister for the medical basis, the exact conditions, and the risk assessment under the Lamia Council. Civil society will frame this as a test on whether the 2020 trial was a moment or a doctrine. If it was a doctrine, then house arrest must be policed as tightly as incarceration. If it was a moment, expect a slow erosion of deterrence. So Greece won unusual global credit in 2020 for demonstrating that a liberal state can prosecute organized political violence through ordinary courts. That credit is at stake whenever enforcement wobbles. Golden Dawn as a brand is ruined, but fragments orbit around other figures. Any slippage in constraints on the former leader will embolden satellite networks, especially online. Watch for coordination signals rather than formal party moves. And health-based mercy is, of course, civilized, but it cannot become a reputational laundrette. The safeguard is transparency. A published anonymous medical rationale, a schedule of reporting duties, a public breach protocol. In a society that, within living memory, I can remember the rise of the junta in 1967. I can remember that vividly, and in a society that has a living memory of far-right repression, Golden Dawn is a problem. So what to watch for next? Conditions, enforcement, victims' rights, and messaging around the 18th of September. So are the explicit prohibitions on publishing essays, podcasts, or coded statements that valorize Golden Dawn practices while under house arrest, are these in order, given the 2024 finding of unrepentant advocacy? If not, prosecutors should seek them or seek to put the man back in jail. Will the supervising authority use electronic monitoring and unannounced checks? And will any single violation trigger recall rather than warnings? That needs to be established. Expect renewed applications from the FISAS and fishermen cases for protective measures and standing to be heard on breaches. Their counsel is already publicly mobilized, and any public intervention by the defendant or his circle around the FISAS anniversary should be treated as a stress test of the conditions and the state's resolve. Democracy must know how to punish without hating, but it must also know how to remember without wavering. In 2020, Greece taught Europe a lesson in memory backed by evidence. In 2025, it must show that mercy does not mean amnesia and that home is not a studio. If the judiciary is certain that confinement at home is the humane and lawful route, it bears an equal duty to guarantee that this home is not a broadcast point for the same ideology a court identified as the engine of criminal enterprise. The social contract after Golden Dawn was simple. No more uniforms after midnight, no more orders spoken as hints, no more terror dressed as politics. Whether that contract holds will be measured not by a signature on a release order, but by the uncompromising enforcement that follows. I think this is this is a really worrying news story, and one that I think probably needs to be followed. For somebody who has been given a 15-year sentence to be released before even 5 years are served is quite astonishing.